Test, test. Test.
Assalamu alaikum, dear respected elders, brothers, sisters, our speakers, Sister Sukaina and Sheikh Jaffar. My name is Dr. Selina Hirji. I am the co-chair of the Jaffari Health and Wellness Board, along with my colleague, Dr. Khalil Sibji, who you will meet later on in the program. I would like to start by welcoming all of you here at the Jaffari Community Center, as well as those of you who have joined us online and are watching our live streaming. We are delighted that you have chosen to join us today for our seminar that we have titled, High Times, Let's Talk Marijuana. Today's event has been organized by the Jaffari Health and Wellness Board in collaboration with the Jaffari Support Services, Jaffari Education Board, and Jaffari Islamic Youth. We are extremely pleased at the level of collaboration with each board, and we thank each and every board member that has worked so hard to put today's program together. Let's begin our program today with a recitation from the Holy Quran by Sister Zahida Hamza. She will then set the stage for our program today by presenting a spoken word poem that she has written herself. May I ask for a loud salawat, please?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for being here. The Quranic recitation I've chosen is Surah Rahman because we are just so lucky and thankful to have this opportunity to talk about such a topic amongst ourselves. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I'm sorry, I lost my Quran. I haven't memorized the surah, so I'm just going to go with Surah Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata allazina an'amta alayhim ghayra al-maghdubi alayhim wala dhalin. Don't be eager just because it's legal. From peer pressure, wiggle. Do not fear, you are an eagle. Soar and claim the skies. Keep your eye on the prize and know it's never the high. Don't fret, be wise. There's more than what meets the eye. No need to try it once, wise guy. It's gonna be hard, never easy, but you are from the kings, meant for big wins. Don't minimize yourself. Don't be a follower. You are a trendsetter. Stay brave, stay wise. From peer pressure, wiggle. Don't be eager just because it's legal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Zaida, for that recitation, as well as the witty and inspiring poem. The title of today's program is High Times, Let's Talk Marijuana. It is meant to be both provocative and proactive. Your presence here today means that we have sparked an interest in this most controversial topic. We've also been told that our Jamaat in Orlando heard about this seminar and asked to use the same title and has held a similar event. Furthermore, I was recently in the UK, and the head office of World Federation has also come to know of our initiative. They were even more impressed that the event would be live streamed, which would allow them to join us. So we hope they're online watching. Our second intention was to be proactive. Why have we chosen to talk about marijuana now, at this time? Well, Canada is among the first countries to legalize recreational use of marijuana. Bill C-45, which you will hear about in one of our speakers very soon, was passed in our Senate. And our Prime Minister Trudeau has announced that as of October 17th, 2018, which is only 2.5 weeks away, Canadian adults will be able to purchase and consume marijuana recreationally without criminal penalties. So, marijuana is here to stay. It will be part of our country, part of our neighborhoods, part of our communities. And so, today, before this legalization comes to play, let's talk marijuana. Let's start an open and honest conversation about what exactly is being legalized. What is marijuana and what are its effects? How can parents and children talk to each other about marijuana? And finally, what does Islam say about the use of marijuana? We hope that as you sit here listening to both of our speakers, you will not only receive some answers to these questions, but they will also stimulate you to raise some other questions. And so we hope that this will only be the beginning. Before we begin our program, I have a few announcements and housekeeping items. Each of you should have received 2 pieces of paper at the time of registration. The first page has a list of resources that have great information about the marijuana legislation and places for those who need support and where they can get it. In addition, Jaffari Support Services have counselors on site here today. If anyone would like to connect with them today, please feel free to do so, and you may reach out to Sister Nikia. The second page of your feedback form is your feedback form. We are always trying to improve our programs and the content, and we value your feedback. And to prove it, if you hand in your feedback form to us, you will receive a raffle ticket, and you may win a prize at the end of today's program. Finally, if you would like to reach out to us during or after the program, if you have questions, concerns that you want to raise, please use the link that was in the poster at the beginning of the program. It will continue to take questions after this program, and we will respond to those questions in our Jaffari Health and Wellness Facebook page. We don't have a formal Q&A session for today because of all the information that we want to relay, so please use these methods to give us feedback and more questions. At this time, please take a moment to put your cell phones on silent. The format of today's program is outlined on your introduction sheet, and you will see we are on a very tight schedule. So we'll ask that you work with us to stay on that schedule. We will now start with our 2 20-minute presentations by our wonderful speakers. And after these 2 presentations are done, we will give you information on how to proceed to the breakout sessions, which will happen after the presentation. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mrs. Sukaina Natu. Sukaina is registered with the College of Psychotherapists of Ontario and is both an independent practitioner as well as a clinical supervisor. She has more than 11 years of experience providing psychotherapy support to vulnerable populations. In fact, she began her career by leading a health provision board of the British Parliament, whose mandate was to improve the accessibility of mental health and addiction services for ethnic minorities. She has a particular passion to support the destigmatization of mental health and drug use among minority populations, including members of places of worship, prisons, and centers for youths at risk. Sukaina is currently employed in a hospital outpatient treatment program, providing assessment, medical withdrawal management, as well as therapy and psychoeducation for patients and family members. However, Sukaina is a holistic therapist who also practices acupuncture, herbal teas, mindful cognitive therapy, and art therapy. Sukaina is married with 2 children, leads an active lifestyle that includes cycling and traveling. We are delighted Sakina has joined us today to enlighten us on the Cannabis Act, marijuana, and much, much more. Please, could we have a loud salawat as our speaker takes the podium?
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome to the High Times event. It's great to see you all joining us here today for such an important and timely conversation. Let's begin with my presentation, an introduction to the Cannabis Act and marijuana. Today's agenda will cover the Cannabis Act, psychoactive elements of cannabis, cannabis and addiction, and potential harms. When the World Health Organization reports 2.5% of the world's population as using recreational or medical marijuana, two things come to mind for me. One, where did they get their stats from? Because it should be a lot higher, pun intended. And secondly, this isn't a him or her issue. This isn't an us or they issue. This is a global issue. And so what I hope we'll be able to learn together in today's presentation is the what, when, where, and how pertaining to the Cannabis Act itself, as well as marijuana and how it impacts our bodies and minds, and the potential related harms and addictive and qualities. I'll wait for that joke. So I think where we should begin really is looking at how we really got here. If we look at Canada's history with marijuana, we go back around 95 years ago, or 42 BT, before Tim Hortons, so we can all keep up. And we realized that it was back then that Canada, like many other countries around the world, became the first to criminalize marijuana. And that's where my joke comes in. It was a big fat no-no. Over the years, we've seen growing interest in this plant, lobbying groups like Free the Leaf, another leaf that Canadians are passionate about. But it wasn't until 2001 when the government responded with a set of regulations. These regulations recognized individuals' right to be prescribed marijuana for medical purposes. So with these regulations, physicians were now able to prescribe medical marijuana, and individuals were able to apply for a license to be able to grow their own or designate someone to do so. But back then, it wasn't as easy to find a physician to prescribe you medical marijuana. And maybe some of the variables included in this kind of challenge for individuals was that physicians had to be able to demonstrate that they tried conventional treatments or that they weren't appropriate. A couple of years go by, and we have growing pressure from Health Canada, who, by the way, gives out these licenses. And they want to see an increased capability of individuals to access medical marijuana, as well as reducing the opportunity for home cultivation. And so those regulations in 2013 set out individuals can no longer grow their own medical marijuana or designate somebody privately to do so. What's interesting and what occurred to me when I was putting together this slide was I've definitely personally come across those news articles where you hear about individuals that have been growing their own marijuana, arguably for medical purposes, and you think, how did they do this, right? Like, it's been illegal. And maybe one of the challenges our government faced back then and may continue to face is when you introduce something as legal and then take it away and make it illegal, it becomes very hard to police. Again, a couple of years go by and we see in so the changes that occurred were 2013, and then again in 2016 we see a change to those regulations. But this time the change, there were many that were introduced, but the main one was around now allowing individuals to grow their medical marijuana again and designating somebody to do so. But the change here, going back, that reversion, is so important because it was a legal case that saw this success. Aled versus Canada. They were able to demonstrate that by regulating medical marijuana and the accessibility of it, it was an infringement on the rights of Canadians' liberty, safety, and human rights. And I'm seeing a pattern, right? We keep going back and forth with not necessarily marijuana, but whether people should be able to grow their own or designate somebody privately to do so. So I was going to quiz the audience, but Selena has given the answer. But I'll see if you guys were listening. Does anybody know the date that the Cannabis Act is going live? Okay, so you were listening. That's good. Yeah, so October 17th. And it's going to come in just a few weeks, and it's come about so quickly from those first initial serious talks in 2017. This is definitely a demonstration of a more liberal move by our government. In 2017, Statistics Canada reported it's a $6.6 billion rec market predicted for the first year. And so with being liberal, our government states that it aims with this act to reduce the harms associated with recreational marijuana on streets that's illicit. It's hard to regulate the strains that are out there and the harms associated with this, as well as the funding of criminal activity and illegal and criminal groups. And so what we see with this change is that, and with changes that have just literally been made 2 days ago, is that we're at a point where this conversation is so important for all of us, and I'm so glad to see a diverse turnout in our audience today, because we'll all find ourselves very shortly having to explain what that funny smell is to maybe our very young children, as well as supporting our seniors around, receiving cold calls and, the promotion of marijuana and its therapeutic application for certain disorders. So now we've talked about how we got here. And Selena also in her introduction mentioned that we're actually going to be the second country around the world to legalize recreational cannabis. And I know some of you might have been thinking me or Selena haven't heard of a place called Amsterdam, but we probably have, but it's a slightly different model. Whereas Canada and Uruguay, being the first country, have legalized cannabis, countries like the Netherlands have actually decriminalized it. So it's somewhat of a different model, and we won't go into that today. But we now know how we got here. So what's it going to look like? Well, quite simply, it's not going to look the same everywhere. And that's because it's going to be a joint federal, provincial, and territorial responsibility to implement and regulate this act. So some of the key differences for us here in Ontario is going to be, for example, the age of accessing recreational marijuana. The Act itself states that no individual under the age of 18 or 19 years of age should be able to purchase or be provided recreational marijuana. And our government in Ontario has decided that the minimum age should be 19 years. Another difference for us here in Ontario, and one that I thought was going to be a key difference compared to other provinces up until 2 days ago, was going to be that it's going to be OCS that provides recreational cannabis, at least for the first year. OCS stands for Ontario Cannabis Store, and it's going to be an online website. We're not going to have any brick and mortar stores, at least for the first year, whereas many of our neighboring provinces have decided to have storefronts. And the key difference now for us here in Ontario is that Doug Ford's lovely government has decided to align the smoking laws for recreational marijuana, once it becomes legal, to align with those similar acts like Smoke-Free Ontario that stipulate where tobacco can be smoked. And I know that this is going to be a burning topic in today's attendees' minds, so we will cover that over the next few slides. So when we look at the allowances, we've talked about age, and we've talked about the fact that it's going to be a website here in Ontario, right? Not storefronts. But I want you to remember the 4 Ps. Purchase, possess, provide, and public place now. So purchase, you need to be of age, so either 18 or 19, depending on where you reside, and older. Individuals will only be able to purchase up to 30 grams at a time of dry cannabis or oils that are legal through government licensed distributors. Possessing in public the same amount and same age based on residence. And when I say provide, what I really mean is share. Should an individual wish to share their substances? What I don't mean is setting up startups for all our budding entrepreneurs. It literally means sharing. And and public place, right? So it's going to align with the same act associated for smoking of tobacco. The other thing that will be allowed is growing up to 4 plants per household. Again, we're not building greenhouses, so it's not per person, it's per household. Prohibitions. I'm going to touch on public use for a moment because, of course, we all want to know if it's going to look similar to tobacco, what does that really mean, right? That means that when it comes to children's playgrounds or playing fields, the distance that individuals need to be who choose to smoke tobacco or cannabis needs to be at least 20 meters. And it needs to be at least 9 meters from hospital entrances. The only difference in the regulations so far with where individuals can smoke cannabis compared to tobacco is that with tobacco it's allowed in cars, and with cannabis that won't be the case. The other prohibition, and that's a nice segue, is into driving intoxicated. And of course, we should all know some of the harms associated with any form of intoxication while you get behind the wheel of a car or heavy machinery. With driving intoxicated, police officers will similarly have the rights, like they do if they have reasonable grounds to suspect intoxication of other substances, be able to pull you over roadside and engage in what's called a field sobriety test. I'm assuming that's like put your arms out and walk in a straight line. What they will also be able to do, and the government has approved the use of, is obtaining a saliva sample so that it can be put into an oral fluid screening device, and that really gauges whether there has been a prominent level of THC indicating recent use. And this gets very complex because it's not as easy to detect as something like alcohol. It's a completely different substance. It works in a completely different way. But we'll look at that in a few moments when we look at how it actually functions with the body. Also, winter is coming. And so we're really going to have to see how these devices hold up in such plummeting temperatures. Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC if you're not trying to be fancy like me. It's one of 500 known chemicals in the marijuana plant, but it's by far the one that has the most famous reputation for getting individuals high as a kite. It's a psychoactive chemical and the most researched so far. So, how does THC actually get in the body and do what it does? So if I was to light up a spliff right now, and I'm mindful that there's people watching online that are probably related to me, so this is all hypothetical. But if I was to light up a spliff, or somebody was to light up a spliff right now, that smoke, which includes that chemical THC, would go into the lungs. And the lungs are covered in millions of alveoli. It actually spans a huge surface area, something larger than an organ like the skin. It's a semi-permeable membrane, which basically means it's really efficient at exchanging gases. So that THC enters the lungs in the form of smoke, and it's passed into the bloodstream and goes into the brain. It reaches peak brain levels within 3 to 10 minutes. That's super efficient, right? And again, there's things that individuals can do to manipulate the substance in the form of use to make that impact even more potent. But we'll, again, talk about that when we get there. What I want to talk about for a moment was some amazing discoveries. So when scientists were actually researching marijuana, or THC, and the impact on humans, they actually came across the endocannabinoid system in the human body. The endocannabinoid system in the human body is able to, I guess, in some way, interact with THC and other chemicals in marijuana. So I know what you're probably thinking. Hold on, we have this system in our body, and it already engages with these chemicals and this substance, and yet it's such a taboo. Well, when they actually found the endocannabinoid system, they found an endogenous, from inside our body, cannabinoid that's similar to THC, called anandamide. And anandamide actually acts as a natural mood elevator. So we already have this system and this natural origin of chemicals interacting to give us what we need. Now, anandamide and THC look very similar. They're not the same, they just look similar. So for a moment, let's picture that anandamide is a key. And the lock to that key we have in our brain, the cannabinoid receptor 1, CB1. And that fits. THC looks like anandamide, so it doesn't fit our lock, but it can get in there. It can get in there and it can dysregulate what it's supposed to regulate. So depending on where THC lands in the brain, that's going to basically set the tone for what kind of symptoms you experience if you were to use marijuana. So THC is used and it lands on the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, amongst other things, is known for regulating appetite. THC hits this spot, you get a surge in endorphins, and hey presto, hello the munchies, you're raiding the kitchen cabinet. THC hits somewhere like the hippocampus, which is known for memory and learning, and the short-term memory is impacted. And you have forgetful Frank or forgetful Farouk on your hands. Some clinical studies show that just by using marijuana once increases the individual's risk of developing mood or psychiatric illnesses by 40%. And that's very important when we come to one of the next slides that talk about the most vulnerable populations. CBD is another cannabinoid, like THC and anandamide, but CBD comes from both the marijuana plant as well as hemp. And one of the common myths is that because you can source CBD from either plant, it's legal. It's actually illegal right now until the act's introduced. And the only place that, that I visited that it doesn't seem to seem as illegal is downtown Toronto, perhaps Kensington Market. But it is, and it will remain until the act's introduced on the 17th of October. The main difference and interest in CBD compared to THC in recent times is that it's firstly non-psychoactive. So compared to THC, where it can produce hallucinogenic and psychedelic effect, CBD does not do that. But it is seen to have similar therapeutic effect, where individuals say that they use THC or marijuana or cannabis for things like anxiety, depression, sleep. CBD can help, is seen so far to help those areas without the negative consequences. And so this is definitely an area of great interest for researchers. CBD also is slow releasing. So we talked earlier, THC levels peak in the brain within 3 to 10 minutes. But with CBD, it takes 1 to 3 hours. It's far more potent, so you need a very small amount of it, and it takes a much longer time to peak. And it's some of these variables that really indicate that it's a chemical that has far less properties to encourage misuse and overdose. So when we look at some of the physical symptoms of cannabis or THC on the system, we see red eyes, dry mouth, increased appetite. But where we see that those are some of those negative consequences, we look at the other side and we say, well, why are those used for medical purposes? And there are some therapeutic effects. But I want to highlight this. It's not that necessarily the use of cannabis or THC should be encouraged. It's just where you see chronic conditions like cancer, etc., where the harms aren't necessarily seen to outweigh the therapeutic effect. So for example, in a cancer patient, increasing appetite can be therapeutic. We're going to talk about the methods of ingestion quickly, and this is an area that gets a lot of interest and a lot of questions that arise from this topic. And there are a plethora of ways that have been invented around how to use cannabis, and we're not going to discuss all of those for obvious reasons. What I am going to do is cover 2 of the main areas. So inhalation, that covers things like spliffs, shisha, bongs. When you look at the spliff, which is basically a cannabis cigarette, you're utilizing the process of combustion to inhale that smoke. And just like cigarettes, there are significant harms associated with that. Firstly, there are a number of cancer-causing agents that are given off during the burning process, as well as transported into the mouth, into the lungs, and other organs in the brain. You know, in recent years, we've seen, people switching from cigarettes to vapes, right? And when cannabis becomes legal for recreational purposes, we're going to see cannabis oils that are able to be used in vape pens. But I want to say that, so compared to a cigarette, you use burning, right? Combustion. And we talked about the harms with that. How a vape pen works is it uses heat to heat up the product. And it creates a vapor, kind of like steaming your vegetables. And so this vapor is easily, taken into the lungs and again passed into the blood and brain. But with vapes, when you're using, or if anybody was to access marijuana, you're going to be accessing it in an oil format. Now, to get cannabis into oil requires the use of a number of preservatives and additives. And those, again, have many harms that we're not completely aware of at this time. And then I'm going to very quickly touch on shisha, as I know it's something that, really impacts our community and predominantly perhaps the youth. There's this, age-old myth that, the apparatus and the water, it kind of diffuses the harms from the tobacco, and I'm not even going to go into the explanations that I've heard, but I'm unfortunately here to say that that's a myth, and it's not true. In fact, when they compared shisha smoke to cigarettes, they found that shisha, because of the burning of the coal and the combustion process there, exposed individuals to 500 to 800 mils more of carbon monoxide than a cigarette. So that's definitely a harm to bear in mind. I'm going to move on quickly now to another form or method of ingestion, and I want to talk about edibles. Under the Act, individuals will be able to make edibles at home until there's an edible market, but there are very strict rules on the government website around what methods could be used and what materials are allowed to be used in that process. Now, when we think of edibles in regards to cannabis, we think of this harmless square of brownie. And when we look at the harms associated to cannabis compared to other substances, other drugs, we say, well, it's not an epidemic of overdose in our communities. And of course, humans care a lot about something that threatens their mortality, not so much everything up until that point. Well, actually, with edibles, some of the most frequent cases of overdose that we see in our emergency rooms are associated with edibles. And the reason for that is because when you ingest cannabis through eating, it's required to break down through the digestion process, which is a long and slow process. And so individuals, as they're eating perhaps cannabis, don't experience the high as quickly, and then they're seeking those desired effects and can easily overeat. And then you're kind of faced with a whole wham-bam, an array of these symptoms that feel like racing heart, sweating, gastrointestinal symptoms, and you feel like you're having a heart attack and you're in the emergency room. An important thing to note about eating cannabis is that during this digestion process and with the acids breaking everything down, there's a change in the enzyme. And so when cannabis is eaten, it produces significantly more hallucinogenic and psychedelic effects to using marijuana in different ways. And again, that can be a major harm, especially where individuals are predisposed to mental health concerns. Okay, when we talk about cannabis and addiction, individuals can think of a number of ways as to why it's not addictive. Maybe it doesn't provide as harsh of the symptoms in withdrawal as we see with some of the other substances. And I've worked in, as Selena mentioned earlier, addictions and mental health for a number of years. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, yes, no, you can do the reading. I'm sure we're all capable of that. But when I explain addictions, I break it down into 4 areas, because it's a very complex area to describe. I break it down in regards to tolerance, dependence, addiction, and withdrawal. Tolerance speaks to the fact that over time, individuals will need more of that substance to seek the same desired effect. Dependence, often interchangeably used with the word addiction, but it's not quite the same. Dependence is basically the fact that your body has adapted to this substance that's been introduced to it. And so when you slow down or stop, you see withdrawals. Addiction is the compulsive engagement of this behavior or the use of this substance despite there being some drawbacks. Maybe they're biopsychosocial drawbacks or consequences. And withdrawals, as we've spoken a little bit about today, is the presentation of either psychological or physical unwanted, unpleasant symptoms when you either slow down or stop use. And based on that, I would say cannabis is addictive, both psychologically and physically. In a number of clinical studies, they've shown that where marijuana use becomes addictive is because there's a surge in this neurotransmitting chemical called dopamine. And that's our kind of feel happy. It makes your behavior be interpreted by the brain as rewarding, so we continue doing it. And in withdrawal, we see a crash in the movement of dopamine. And so there's a huge impact to what we seek from these substances and when we aren't able to function on them any longer. As I mentioned earlier, there are some key populations that are at risk of the impact of cannabis. Youths, pregnant women, and those that are predisposed to mood or psychiatric illnesses. That means if you've experienced it before or it runs in the family, there are some significant links between genetic disposition and the presentation or the predisposition. You're more likely to experience it in your lifestyle. And it's important here to mention that mental health is something that we all have. It's about how we upkeep it. I want to talk quickly towards the end of my presentation today about harm reduction. Most of us don't really know what harm reduction is, or the only exposure we've had to this term is when the news talks about the ethical dilemma of letting people safely inject in those injection clinics downtown. I'm a big proponent of harm reduction. And before I get judged, let me explain to you what I feel the essence of harm reduction is. So a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting at my dining table working on this presentation. And I was talking out loud because I tend to talk out loud when I'm working or thinking. And my husband was sitting opposite me working on something that he was doing for work. And my 5-year-old daughter was also working on a school presentation. And so I was talking out loud and I was talking about harm reduction. And my husband says, well, you know, you always talk about harm reduction. I'm not sure if I agree with this. And so I looked at my 5-year-old daughter, as I often do, to rationalize stuff that my husband says. And I said, you know, Nana smokes cigarettes. And she said, yeah, Mommy, smoking is so bad for you. And I said, yeah, you know, she said, Nana should stop. And I said, yeah, he really should. God knows I've been trying to tell him that since I was little. But I said, you know, if we ask Nana to stop, he'll say, I've been smoking all of my life. It's so hard for me to just stop. And I looked at her and I said, so what do you think Nana should do? And she looked at me puzzled, as she often does, like I'm putting these huge life, you know, dilemmas on her 5-year-old shoulders. And I said, well, Aya, what if Nana just smoked a little less? And her eyes lit up, like she'd been given the answer to the world's problems. And she said, yeah, Mommy, that would at least be a little bit better. And that's the point I'm making about harm reduction, and that's why I'm so passionate about it in my line of work. Harm reduction engages in compassion, meeting people within their capacity and still feeling that that life is worthy, in supporting, in helping towards that goal of being exposed to just a little less harm. So in summary, today we've talked about when this act is coming, and some of the ways that it might challenge all of us as a wider member of society as well as our own community. We've talked about ways that it can be used and the potential harms associated with it. And we've talked about the addictive and very real risk associated with marijuana use. Thank you so much for your time.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Dr. Khalil Sivji, and as Selena mentioned earlier, I'm the co-chair of the Health and Wellness Board. First of all, I'd like to thank Sukaina for that tremendous overview. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure most of you did. I especially enjoyed the part where she started talking about the lungs. As a respirologist, I love hearing about the lungs. And she mentioned that the surface area of the lungs is really large. This is how we absorb things that we inhale, fortunately or unfortunately. And the surface area of the lungs, I tell my patients this all the time, and I teach my residents and my fellows this, is about the size of a tennis court. Which brings me to my next speaker, who really needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyways. I've had the pleasure of knowing Sheikh Jaffar since he was a kid, and he was younger, and he could keep up with me on the tennis court. That's no longer true. But we had some great times, and he's really been a good friend of mine since my days in Los Angeles. He's currently the resident alim of the Masumin Islamic Center in Brampton, Ontario. He has completed 4 years of study at Hausa Studies and holds a master's degree in Islamic education from the University of Winchester. Sheikh Jaffar.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد ربي أنتقنا بالهدى وألهمنا التقوى السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You know, when I think of marijuana, in my experiences, I grew up in LA, California, moved there when I was 10. And so I've experienced, I guess, the West for a long time now, right? And from my interactions with people and what I see around me, and when I recall my youth, you know, marijuana is one of those drugs which I would say is the most socially acceptable illegal drug that's there. You know, if a person smokes marijuana, you don't look at them differently, you know. Maybe the older people do. But, you know, when the younger person looks at somebody who smokes, it's not a big deal. You don't get the same look as if you had done cocaine, for example, right? So marijuana just seems to be okay, and I think there are numerous reasons for that, right? One, it just seems so natural. I mean, God put it there, you know. And if God put it there, it should be okay. But you see that even pop culture has glorified it so much, right? Where you have these pop culture icon movies like Friday that dedicates itself to the smoking of weed. You know, that was my day. I don't know if you guys remember that movie, but that was during when I was a young kid. You have T-shirts with the cannabis leaf on it. You have a picture of Bob Marley smoking a joint, and kids are wearing these. This just seems very normalized now, that weed has become okay and weed has become normal. You know, and I think about the first time I was offered weed, you know. I think I was 17 years old, and that's pretty late, you know. That's pretty late. And that was the first time I ever got exposed to weed. I didn't even know what weed was until I was 17. Imagine that, right? I don't know if because I was fresh off the boat or whatever it was, you know, but I think my parents did a good job raising me, to be quite honest. The friend circles that I kept didn't smoke weed, you know, and so my neighbor knocked my door. I remember very vividly, you know, he knocked at my door at night and said, "Hey, Jaffar, you want to smoke some weed?" And you know, my reaction was, I was like, "What's weed?" Yeah. And so he gave me all like some names, like, you know, Mary Jane. And I was like, "What?" And he laughed at me. I remember him laughing at me because I had no idea what it was at that time, you know. Now, for the sake of clarity and before a clip is made of what I just said, I said no, yeah? So I just want that to be out there before a new fitna is started, you know. I said no, but the pressures increased after that. You see it being normalized. In college campuses, they used to smoke openly. But the reason I'm mentioning that right now is that, I was 17 when I was exposed to it. Today I meet kids as young as 11, 12, and 13 who are already exposed to it. They know what it is. Kids that young have smoked it already. Imagine, like, we're speeding up the pace, and something which has been socially acceptable underground, I guess you can say, with this legalization, now it's going to be in everyone's faces, right? As was mentioned by Sister Sukaina, that if I have to explain to my 7-year-old what that smell is now, right? And that's something that I think she's too young for, to be exposed to that. I'm happy that I was exposed much later to life to the vices that exist in our society, but this is something that requires our attention, that requires us to talk about it openly. And so I'm really pleased and grateful that the Jaffari Health and Wellness Board have organized this event, along with JEB, JSS, JIY, I don't know who else is out there, but for everyone who helped organize this event, and for all of you for participating in it. I think it just shows, to be quite honest, the brilliance of our community here in Toronto. That we're not afraid of tackling such taboo subjects that other people still don't like talking about. But we're going to talk about it and describe what Islam has to say about it. So today I'm just going to describe the Islamic perspective, and it's very easy, the Islamic perspective on it, but we're going to take it in steps kind of to describe it. So from an Islamic perspective, we begin with an overarching prohibition of anything which intoxicates. So basically, from an Islamic understanding, anything which intoxicates is haram. Okay, so there are numerous traditions and there are verses of the Quran that talk about this as well. But for example, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, he says, "Ihdaru kulli muskir." Stay away from every type of, or be careful of every type of intoxicant. فَإِنَّ كُلِّ مُسْكِرٍ haram. For anything which intoxicates is haram. You have other traditions. For example, our fifth Imam alayhi salam says, whatever substance intoxicates when consumed in large amounts is prohibited in small amounts. Right? So for example, if it takes you 2 joints to get high, it's not that you can say, well, I just had 2 puffs, I'm not high, so it should be okay. No, anything which, even if it takes a lot of to get high, a small amount of that would be haram. It takes you 5 glasses of wine, even a drop of wine would then be haram. So anything which is intoxicating from an Islamic perspective is considered haram. And so, it's based on such traditions and more like it, and very clear Quranic verses, in fact, that anything that causes intoxication is prohibited. And we find that our maraja are unanimous in this opinion. You will not find any type of discrepancy when it comes to intoxicants. There are no loopholes I can give you, right? Ayatollah Sistani is very clear on this as well in the Code of Practice for Muslims in the West. He says, it is forbidden to drink wine, beer, and everything that causes intoxication or drunkenness in solid or liquid form. Yeah? So basically anything that brings about a stage where you are not sober anymore, that brings about intoxication, whether it be in a liquid form or a solid form, is considered to be haram. And he says, Allah says in the Quran, O you who believe, intoxicants and games of chance and sacrificing to stones, basically idolatry, and dividing up arrows, the form of like chance basically, are only an uncleanliness, the shaitan's work. Shun it therefore that you may be successful. So as an overarching principle, right, intoxicants are haram. I remember this tradition which I like very much, but I didn't get a chance to grab it, but the hadith, it basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it says that khamar, wine, has not been made haram because it is khamar. But khamar is haram because it's an intoxicant. Therefore, anything which is an intoxicant is khamar. It's a very beautifully phrased statement by, I think it's Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that describes that. So when it comes to marijuana then, right, Marijuana then is included in this ruling of intoxicants because one of the effects of marijuana is intoxication, right? We may not call it intoxication, we may call it getting high, right? But the effect is exactly the same. According to most medical experts, that some effects may include a general alteration of conscious perception, euphoria, feeling of well-being, relaxation, or stress reduction. These seem like positive, you know? Like these are okay, these are not bad things, but these are just masks of intoxication, basically, right? So I feel relaxed because I'm intoxicated. I feel happy because I'm high, right? It's not that I'm just happy all the time, but I'm high now, I'm happy now for a particular reason. So based on these reasons then, we find that in Shia fiqh, right, all the mujtahideen of our time, right, are unanimous on this issue, that all intoxicating drugs are haram, except for medicinal use. Now we're going to come to that. It was described before us that there are some benefits to marijuana. I don't think any one of us can deny that. So you find that the rule basically states that for any other purpose besides medicinal use, and that should be based on the permission of a qualified physician, but we'll talk about that in a second as well. Our mujtahideen are unanimous on this. There is really no way out. There is no exception to this rule that marijuana is ever going to be permitted. At least there is nothing that will break that out of the realm of intoxication, right? Except for that medicinal reasons. And so far, we haven't even heard any dissenting view from any qualified mujtahid or marja to say the opposite of that being true. That means that there is a possibility or to give reasons why it would be okay for some versus not. There are certain things which are very cut and dry in Islam, right? And intoxicants fall under that category. So from this then, right, a couple of points that do come up and questions that are asked, and I asked the Health and Wellness Board if there are any specific questions that you'd like me to answer. So we get these questions all the time. So first is, it clearly must not be so bad if the government is legalizing it, right? And if the government is legalizing it, then shouldn't Islam reconsider its position on it as well? And I think the answer we all understand is very simple, right? That Islam's answers and the laws of Sharia are not based on the legality of what the country's laws are, right? Otherwise, alcohol would have been changed a long time ago. So our values and our responsibilities are not based on the changing norms of society, right? And that's where we differ dramatically. We respect the law. That means we're not going to go out and harm someone or even abuse someone or do whatever it is that one may do when something they don't like is in their face. We're going to turn around and walk away because we don't want to be exposed to that. But it doesn't mean that I can go and participate with that, right? That doesn't mean that I can go out and support marijuana causes now because it's become legal. Islam still considers it to be haram as a rule. So that's the answer. The next question is that how come people don't view smoking shisha or cigarettes the same as smoking weed, right? There is a taboo of smoking weed that is not there when it comes to smoking cigarettes or smoking shisha. And if anything, the question says shisha and cigarettes are much more unhealthy. Sorry, I don't know where we are. Are much more unhealthy and deadly. So as the harms, so we have to understand something, that God is not in charge of what's taboo or not. Right? That is very culturally driven of what is taboo and what is considered to be acceptable and what is not considered to be acceptable. However, we're coming to a day and age now where as the harms of cigarettes and shisha are becoming more and more known, you can't even deny it really anymore, right? They have it on cigarette packs, for example, right? So as these are becoming more and more known, you'll find today more and more maraja are outright saying that it is haram to smoke cigarettes, for example. You'll see more and more of that today. Or you have mujtahideen or maraja who are conditionally going towards the prohibition of cigarettes. Yani if you think it's harmful for you, they've left it very subjective, but it takes a very silly person to be able to argue that it's not, you know. So you're only fooling yourself if you're trying to use a loophole within that system, basically. So we're going towards that. We're going towards that path where now it is becoming prohibited, basically. And we'll see how our community responds to that, right? However, when it comes to marijuana, the prohibition of marijuana is not based on health reasons. The prohibition of marijuana is because it's an intoxicant, right? Now, we have proof today that in certain instances marijuana can be useful, but in other instances, if a child smokes it at a young age, it can lead to forms of psychosis, for example. It can lead to other issues, health stunts, mental stunting, and all of those things. And long-term effects of smoking could have similar effects to the lungs the way smoking does, right? So we have those on one hand, and we have others. So as the medical, I guess, reports will come out about marijuana as we go forward, there may be a secondary prohibition based on health reasons, but even that would not be necessary, really, considering that it is already haram based on intoxicants. So the taboo may be based on those lines, I think, where one is because it's an intoxicant and another is for the health reason. And maybe I feel I can get away with it for health reasons or whatever, but the intoxicant has this label with it, right? Alcohol has always been something that is a taboo, so marijuana kind of fits into that line. So again, it's for different reasons, okay? Another question that is asked is, is that, you know, like why, what's the, and I get this all the time, and I'm sure you get this all the time, that really what's the big deal, you know? That if something can make me relaxed for a few hours and forget about the stresses of what I'm going through, and especially during exams and things like that, what's the big deal? And that's the biggest deal, you know? When I hear what's the big deal, I find that that's the biggest deal, because we haven't understood God well enough at that time. When I can take something that God says is haram and say, what's the big deal? That's a big deal, okay? We have to teach each other that we can't seek Band-Aid solutions to greater life problems. And marijuana will simply offer a Band-Aid solution. You'll feel good for 4 hours, you'll go to sleep, the stress will be there tomorrow, right? And so you'll feel the need to take it again. We have to teach the culture of realizing that there are better ways to cope with our difficulties, because life is full of difficulties. And so we have to teach that, we have to promote that, and we have to support that, and not just fall back on things which are going to make me feel better very temporarily. Are there examples of the prohibitions that have been described? Yes. The only example, basically, the only exception is, No, the exception is medical purposes, right? And again, this has to be provided by a physician, but not these physicians that you can just kind of talk to on Skype, you know, and say that I have headaches, so they send you a prescription right away. I had someone said they went to a medical marijuana clinic, and that's how it worked. There was a lineup behind a Skype desk, and you would just tell them, my back hurts. Okay, here you go, and here you go, and they were handing out prescriptions. At the end of the day, you are responsible in the eyes of God. That's all we can say. We can't offer a criteria of these are the list of conditions would be okay. We can't do that, right? So if a person has a legitimate reason, and I don't know what that legitimate reason is, because it could be different from me to you, right? But it has to be like a legitimate reason. So you can't just go in with headaches that can be solved with a cup of coffee or fresh air or exercise or Tylenol and say, well, I'm going to smoke weed instead, right? But if it is something that's needed and you are prescribed marijuana, it would be legal for you. However, then the responsibility of how you use that will fall on the patient entirely, meaning that how much you use, when you use, if you're becoming addicted to it and being able to stop using, if you're now using just because you want to use versus it's actual time for you to use. All of these things would be your responsibility. And when you're using it in times that you're not, you would be doing something haram at that time. So it's a tough responsibility, but at the same time we need to be accepting that this is an option sometimes. So I'm not denying that it is, I don't want to sit here and say it's bad all the time. But I think that if we can avoid it as much as we can, it's better. Because besides the medical, there's a whole spiritual side that I think we need to be concerned about more so than the physical. And the spiritual side, we're very prone to losing control very quickly, is what I'm saying, right? What are the ethics behind marijuana business? So basically, are we allowed to grow marijuana? Are we allowed to distribute, invest in businesses, or being involved in paraphernalia and whatnot? So basically the answer is that getting involved for recreational use would not be allowed in any way. However, if you are investing in a company that uses or sells only to medical clinics, then it would be okay. Because usage is allowed medically, then business in that area would be allowed. You understand? But if you're, for example, and I think now it's going to be less and less of that because it's going to, I don't know, can I finish? Yeah? So investing in a business which only supplies to medical stores basically would be allowed. So investing in stocks in medical companies would be allowed. And if you're sure that they're only doing it in that, it would be allowed, basically. Finally, the last question that was posed is that what should be the responsibility of community leaders in the new era of legalized marijuana? It's not just community leaders like me and anybody who sits up here, but all of us. How are we supposed to act? So the first, is we need to educate ourselves about marijuana, about these different things, and the harms of it and its prohibition from an Islamic or from a fiqhi position. But at the same time, it's as I think the newer parents are a little bit more hip to it, kind of. But I'm pretty sure if I wanted to get away with something with my mom, I could have a long time ago, because they weren't exposed to these things, honestly, right? Like they weren't exposed, like till today, like I'm shocked, right? But till today, you'll have parents come up and say, in conversation, like, yeah, he came home at 1 and had a full dinner. And he's like, mashallah, he's growing. And I was like, bro, he's not growing, he's got the munchies, right? But they don't connect the dots, right? Like they don't, because it's very hard for you to see your son or daughter doing these things, right? But I think as parents, we got to know these things. Like, it's not just in drug use, but when it comes to bullying, we got to know the signs of bullying. When it comes to all of these things that our children may be exposed to, we have to be educated about these things and be able to provide the right type of guidance when it's there. We have to also change perception within users. And this is a tough task, but we have to make users realize that there are better and long-lasting ways to counter the challenges or to counter the effects that marijuana have, right? So marijuana will make you feel good, but Islam tells us that there are ways of feeling good that will last you forever. So let's work on those. Let's build ourselves up spiritually so that we can counter these. And the last thing for me is be compassionate, If you know a user and don't shut the door on them. That's the worst thing we can do as adults and as community leaders, to say that you don't belong here, for example. I mean, I know many people who are different human beings today than they were when they were younger, but if the community had shut the door on them, they would never have come back, And I'll end with this hadith, because this is my favorite hadith. And I've said it, I know I've quoted it on a minbar here, and I've quoted everywhere I get a chance, because this hadith changed the way I do my work as a resident alim of a community, right? And it's changed the way I deal with people entirely. So a man comes up to our sixth Imam as-Sadiq alayhi afdalus salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he says, he greets him, so he comes to him to Medina, he greets him, and he says that I am a man from Bani al-Harith bin Ka'ab, from an area of the people of Harith bin Ka'ab. And he says that I come to you as your Shia, as your Mawali, as people who love you and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So the Imam looks at him and says, alaykum salam, welcome. He says, I know the area of Harith bin Ka'ab very well. And he says, and there are not too many people who are our lovers there. There's more animosity in that area than there are people who actually love us. And he says, so tell me, how did this love for us develop? And so the man says, I own a farm. And in this farm, I have workers. And the workers have a day off on Friday. And so what they do is that on Friday, they gather food from the entire week, and then they have a huge feast on Friday. He's like, and they invite me to join them. So I join them. He's like, and after we eat, the workers bring out wine. Yeah? And so they bring out wine and they pour wine for everybody. And they say that no one will taste a drop of wine until you recite salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so he said, we recite your salawat loudly and then we get drunk after that. And he says that love has become so firm in us that we are your muwali now. Imagine you hearing that, right? Like it's pretty, it sounds like, what? Like what kind of thing is this? But this is sometimes the way we think. Oh, you got high yesterday and you were at mosque now. You went to a club yesterday and you were at the mosque now. We feel like, like as if we are saints ourselves, and other people are not. So the Imam replies back in the most beautiful way possible. He says, فَقَالَ لِي إِسْتَوْصِي بِهِ خَيْرًا. He says, tell them that I wish for them the best. Yeah? And tell them that Jaffar bin Muhammad sends salam upon them. But tell them that Jaffar bin Muhammad has also said that my lovers do not drink alcohol. And he went back with that message. And he says the man after that day never touched a drop of alcohol again. Imam Sadiq could have said, get out of here. What kind of mawadda is this? What kind of wilaya is this? But Imam accepted, because sometimes people's layers and levels are different. The challenges are different. You got to accept the good and correct the bad, right? So we're not showing compassion and tolerance to accept their way of life, but rather to teach them a better way of life. And we need the help of all of us to do that. So I hope that this will bring about more awareness within our community and open dialogue within our community. And for those seeking help, alhamdulillah, our community has numerous resources to help anyone who needs it. Thank you so much for listening to me. Wa akhiru da'wan and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin.
Can we get one more salawat for both of our speakers? Sheikh Jaffar, we sincerely thank you for enlightening us on the Islamic perspective of the use of marijuana. You have definitely given us some food for thought. In fact, personally, I've changed my behavior already. I've had some special brownies on the way here, but I've canceled that order, so thank you for that. But in all seriousness, we are in some serious times. Times are changing. We are all going to be faced with this, whether we like it or not. And thank you for providing us with the knowledge that will enable us to navigate through the effects of this new legislation coming in 2.5 weeks. The boards that have been contributing to this, and we would not have been able to put this together without their help, as well as the Health and Wellness Board, love feedback. And one of the feedbacks that we got from our last event, when we had a heart health event back in the spring, some of you may have attended, was that in addition to these great lectures and getting this great information, you had a lot of questions. I know someone had one on this side. And you like to interact. So we've taken that feedback into consideration, and we've created breakout sessions. So we're going to go into our breakout sessions at this point. We'll come back to this room in about 30 minutes, and we'll summarize. Each breakout session has a representative that's already been chosen that will summarize what has been brought up at the breakout sessions. And so you'll be able to hear what everyone else was saying. And for those of you online, alhamdulillah, we have about 70 people online listening today. You won't be in the breakout sessions, obviously, because of the technological limitations, but you will be able to hear the summaries at the end. Now, I told you at the beginning, we love feedback. Feedback is a gift. And to reward you for that gift you're giving us, each one of you has a feedback session, so a feedback form that you received. If you didn't, please get one from the front desk, registration desks. If you fill out your feedback form and you give it to the board member that's in each breakout session, you will receive a raffle ticket for a prize at the end. So we will reward you for your kindness in giving us the gift of your feedback. At this time, I'd like to explain the breakout sessions. The group 1 will be led by Sheikh Jaffar and will be in the seniors lounge. And it will be for the iGen generation, or the Gen Z generation. I'm learning these two things as well. Apparently that is people between the ages of 13 and 25. So anyone less than 25 will go with Sheikh Jaffar to the seniors lounge. Again, we'll be bringing you back in 30 minutes so that we can share what's come up. Group 2 will be led by Sister Sukaina Nathu. And those will be the millennials, so 20 to 40-year-olds will stay on the ladies' side. We have been given permission that we can have men and women on the same side of the partition during the breakout sessions, as long as the chairs are separated appropriately. And the third group, the third breakout session, will be led by Sister Alia Dharamsi, and that's for caregivers. So if you are in the position where you are taking care of a young child, or you're the parent of a child, and you would like to join that group, that will be on the men's section of the, no, correction, it'll be on the other side of this barrier, okay? So there's chairs set up on the other side of the back room in Marba Hall. Again, we'll all come back here in 30 minutes. We'll give summaries, we'll have the raffle, and then we'll adjourn for the day. So thank you. If you take, you have to figure out, do you take care of somebody? Yeah. Okay, just to remind everyone, so the Gen Z, or the people less than 25, are in the seniors group. The millennials are on the other side of this Marhaba Hall. No. Sorry, the millennials are on this side of the hall, and the caregivers are on the other side of the barrier. Yeah. No, caregivers are on the other side. At this point, can we ask all the groups to come back to the main hall? You should have all filled out your feedback forms and received a raffle ticket. For those of you watching online, we're just getting back to the main hall. We're going to do a quick summary, and then we'll be done for the afternoon. Sure. Could I have the assistant facilitators come to the front, please? Okay, can we please have everyone take their seats so we can wrap up? Zamina, do you have your bowl of tickets? Okay. Okay, let's start with the caregivers group. So the assistant facilitator was Sabika Jaffar, and she's going to share the thoughts of that group. And then if anyone who was in that group has not turned in their feedback form or has not gotten a raffle ticket, please do so right now.
So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Sabika Jaffar, and I was one of the facilitators for the caregiver group. So one of the most important themes that came up in our discussion was that elders are not aware of what marijuana looks like. They're not aware of what it smells like. They're not aware of what people who are high look like. And by not knowing what these things are, they won't be able to identify if their child is smoking or if anyone else is smoking around them. Also, besides the positive aspect of smoking marijuana, such as medical use, we said that the religious aspect and the Islamic perspective also needs to make a strong point across because it's on the same level of intoxicants such as alcohol. One big takeaway we took away from the discussion is that we should start being proactive. So instead of waiting for our child to come up to us with an issue or if they're in a situation, we should talk to them and we shouldn't assume what they know because in this generation, kids are really smart and they already might know at a young age what marijuana is, but they might not know the proper use and whether we should be doing it or not. So by talking to them and not waiting for them to come up to you, it creates a safe space. And for other issues, they'll feel like they can come to you and trust you. So it just improves communication. We're interested in learning more about, as a parent or as an individual, what do we do if our child comes up to us and asks us for approval? So this is different from if they come up to us and ask us, what is marijuana? It's like, hey, can we do it just for experiment? So that was something we wanted to learn more about. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to have you choose the winner of the caregivers group for people who handed in their feedback forms and got a raffle ticket. Yeah, why don't you read the number?
So the number of the ticket is 376-2234. Okay.
Here we have a salawat. So thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, the next group, if I could have Ali Raza come up, was the millennials group.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Ali Raza. So we had a few different themes that came up in our discussion that seemed more prevalent than others. The first one would be the use of marijuana for treatment of like stress and anxiety and learning about that and why it's been prescribed and why it's so popular for treating stress and anxiety. And then we talked about the alternatives to using it for stress and anxiety. For example, meditation and mindfulness practices that are becoming very popular nowadays with people to manage levels of stress. And then we talked about how do we rationalize this to other people that say, well, you know, medical marijuana has been legal for some time now and it's proven to work for, you know, various purposes. And so we described the logic behind not using marijuana as opposed to alternative treatments. A few takeaways that some people in our group had were laws regarding public spaces and marijuana. And you know, there were people in our group that were shocked and surprised at the fact that it will be aligned with tobacco law and the impact it has on the elderly and the fact that they're, you know, a vulnerable demographic in our community and the fact that we should be, you know, looking more to help assist and educate these people as well. And then some of the topics that we said we were interested in were how do parents, young parents and parents of young children, how do they tackle the issue of marijuana as their child is growing up? You know, how do they address it in their house? How do they manage the fact that there's going to be this influence in their life at school? It's going to be very, you know, widespread. Marijuana already, despite it being illegal, it's already a large part of society and modern Western culture. And so how do you tackle that? And how do you talk to your kid and educate them on, you know, the harms and how not to use it and avoid it? Another topic that we wanted to know more about was how do you address students if you're a teacher, whether it's, you know, professionally or at madrasa, how do you take these questions and how do you, how do you train your students to come to you and find the right resources and things like that. So that was our group.
Great. Thank you, Larissa. And you want to choose the winner from the millennial group? Yeah.
So the number was 376-2201. Can we have a salawat?
Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So that's for you. Thanks. Thank you for your feedback. Okay, and the last but not least, I would argue the most important group, the young ones, the Generation Z. And mashallah, I stuck my head into that room 2 or 3 times, and they were having some really robust and energetic conversations and peppering Sheikh Jaffar with some very difficult questions. So I'm sure I'm going to hear that from him next time I see him socially. But could we have Siddiqa?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Siddiqa, and I was in this, as Brother Khalil said, really great discussion that came up in this group. So I really commend all the youth that came out in that group and asking your questions. They were really great questions. Some of the big themes that came out is some of the reinforcing some of the medical, the myths that exist about there not being any addictive potential with marijuana. So we talked a little bit about how there definitely are, and the physiological and medical harms, especially for younger people, where there is something called cannabis-induced schizophrenia, which is a phenomenon that is mostly seen in those under the age of 25. So that's something that came up there. We talked about, what's the big deal if we use a little bit sometimes, and we talked about some of the harms associated with that and how, a little bit can be a gateway to a lot more. And then we talked about some of the benefits of using it as a coping mechanism versus other coping mechanisms that we can use that are provided by our community and our faith that are more long-term in terms of coping with the struggles and the stresses that we have in our lives. So some of the takeaways that we took from the event are that there's a need for less stigmatized and less taboo conversations that need to happen around this topic. There needs to be more of an environment of safety for, kids who are struggling with using marijuana, who want to stop using marijuana, who are looking for someone to talk to, who are looking for help. I think there's an opportunity for us to, sit down and think of ways that we can create a safe environment or a support group or something like this. They do exist, and we have tried to do them in our community. The support is there, but, maybe I would encourage all of us to kind of think about what we can do as individuals to create this environment of no judgment or a safe space where people do not feel judged, or a teenager doesn't feel judged for coming to someone. It could be anyone in our community for help, because there is this idea or fear of being judged that exists with seeking help for things in our community. So, I encourage everyone to just take a moment to think about what you can do as an individual, what I can do as an individual to help somebody feel safe and to feel not judged for coming forward and asking for help. Thanks.
And can I get you to choose the winner from that group?
376-2147. No? Yeah. 376-2147. Yeah? Awesome.
Salawat. It's for you. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
Okay, so in conclusion, On behalf of all the boards involved, we would like to thank our speakers who have taken a great deal of time and effort in preparing their excellent speeches this afternoon. We'd like to thank you, the audience, who took the time for being proactive and for coming here today to the JCC to learn about marijuana. We'd like to thank those who are watching abroad, online, from all parts of the world, we hope. I'll give a personal shout out to my daughter Iman, who's watching from UK. And we hope that the 70 of you who've been watching us have benefited from this program. Inshallah, we'll take this information that we received today and be better prepared for what's about to hit us. We'll leave you with a final thought that we left you in your information package, a resource sheet. Please do refer to that. Our speakers have taken a great deal of time in consolidating the resources for you. So at whatever stage in life you are, whatever your needs are, please go to that first. Secondly, as we said, we put the link up for any feedback or questions that you may have. Thirdly, please look up any of the boards that participated today and reach out to them on the Jamaat website and send your questions along. Thank you very much.